since we thought this discussion was so important that we wanted to share it and open it up to the entire public, there may be some of you who are joining who are not really too familiar with who we are at Lyme Connect. So I just want to take a moment to share with you a little bit about us. We are a not-for-profit organization at Lyme Connect, and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We do that by attracting, preparing, and connecting high potential professional and university students, including veterans, into our network. And these individuals have all different types of disabilities. Once an individual with a disability joins our network, they're eligible to apply for our different leadership programs, internships, and full-time and scholarships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations. We also support our partners. We have some great corporate partners and many who are joining today. And as a partner, we support you in recruiting, onboarding, developing, retaining, and promoting all employees who have disabilities. So I encourage you, if you're joining today and you are an individual who has a disability, please join our Lyme network. If you are not a person who has a disability but would like to stay informed about all that we do at Lyme Connect, please join as a friend of the Lyme network. And I know that my colleague is putting those links in the chat right now. So we look forward to having you join us at other sessions. And as I said, since Lyme consists of people with all different types of disabilities, we started this series last year that allowed us to take a deeper dive and have a deeper discussion around different disabilities. So in this month of April, where we really shine a light on autism, we're thrilled to have 4 members of the Lyme network joining us to talk about their experience as individuals on the autism spectrum. And I'm so pleased to welcome our moderator. Her name is Paulette Penzvalto. Paulette is a member of the Lyme Network who was selected as a Google Lyme Scholar in 2015. And Paulette is currently working at Google as an engineering program manager, where she also sits on the Google Disabled Leaders Advisory Board, founded AutistX at Google, and is the incoming COO of the Google Disability Alliance. Paulette was named 40 under 40 by the Silicon Valley Business Journal in 2021, and she's passionate about diversity and inclusion. Paulette presents internationally as a keynote speaker on issues pertaining to autism and employment in tech, and served on the San Francisco Mayor's Council for People with Disabilities. She studied computer science while a student at Columbia University, and she also has 2 graduate degrees in opera. And last season, she was main stage artist at Opera San Jose and sang on the album Curtain Lounge, Precious Jewels, which was nominated for 6 Grammy Awards, including Best Foreign Language Album. So with as busy as she is, I feel very lucky that Paulette was able to join us to lead this very important discussion around Voices of Lyme, Life on the Autism Spectrum. So welcome, Paulette, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Renee. I really appreciate it. Yes, I'm Paulette. I am in Sunnyvale, California. I sit on Ohlone land right now. And I am wearing a black Google Disability Alliance t-shirt. And what that means is the G is a regular G. I've got 2 O's in Braille. I've got another G in sign language, a regular L, and then the E features an individual in a wheelchair. And I have long auburn hair and fair skin. Yes, and so I am very excited to be here. Longtime Lyme Connect member, and I was first introduced to Google by Lyme, so I'm very grateful for that. I'm very excited about the panel we have today. Really, I'm breathing some rarefied air here amongst the Lyme community. I'm very excited to have all these folks on the line. And so I'd love to have our panelists introduce themselves, including their name, position, the company they're at, and then the country they happen to be from. So if the folks would like to, I'd like to have our panelists come on camera and introduce themselves. Hugo, would you like to start?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Hugo Bernier. I'm a senior cloud solution architect from Microsoft, and I'm calling from Toronto, Ontario. I am a 6-foot male with a shaved head. That was by choice, with a blue Microsoft Zip hoodie.
Very nice. Cool. Wade?
Hi, Wade Forrest. I am a 6-foot Caucasian male. Only have half of my head shaved, just the sides, by choice, unfortunately, to Hugo. Also, I'm in the Bay Area and in the USA, and incredibly proud to be here. But I always have a quirky smile, and I'm very excited for the day.
Awesome. Thank you.
But my role here is at PwC, and I'm a director of product experience.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you. PwC actually welcomed me to a Lime event once many years ago, and it was really cool. And Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Samantha. I am a Caucasian woman. I'm 24. I have brown hair. It's pulled back in a ponytail right now. I'm wearing, I think it's a t-shirt. I don't know terms for fashion things. I think it's a pink t-shirt and some kind of sweater type thing. It's long sleeve, that's what matters. I am a software engineer at JPMorgan Chase working on the home lending website, which is really fun, and I'm based in the United States.
So cool. That's awesome. I really appreciate everyone being here today. And I'm probably most excited about this question, but I would love to hear a little bit about each of your journeys with autism. You know, you don't feel pressure to answer anything here unless you feel so inclined. If you feel like sharing, what age were you diagnosed as autistic? Once you were diagnosed, what kind of support or accommodations did you receive? What did you find to be helpful to like kind of crack the neurotypical code in life? And then how does autism impact you now, or does it, in your personal or professional life? And I would imagine it both impacts and helps in a lot of ways. So yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that, I'd welcome your thoughts.
I can start on that. So I was diagnosed when I was, I think, 5th grade, so around 10 years old, maybe 11. And my parents had been trying for some time to get me diagnosed. At the time, the diagnosis was Asperger's syndrome, which is, of course, now folded into the autism diagnosis. And even then, I think it was a little bit less known. People would probably look at me and think, oh, that girl she doesn't have an intellectual disability. She gets good grades. I don't know what to diagnose her with. She's a girl with good grades.
Mm-hmm.
And it just took a really, really long time to get the diagnosis. Kind of a pain. I had to keep going to different people over and over. And when you're 10, that's incredibly boring. Mm-hmm. Eventually, we found a grad student who knew some of the less well-known stuff, I suppose, and was not afraid to diagnose a girl with Asperger's syndrome or autism diagnosis, thank goodness. And after that, I didn't really get any immediate accommodations at school because I don't think they really knew what they would do about it. But I had one teacher who was really nice and would provide accommodations without any of the paperwork. For example, I was really bad at doing the reading log. The reading part I was great at. It was the log part that I was bad at because I was so busy reading. I was not keeping track of how long I was reading, what pages I started and ended on, any of that. And the teacher said to me that my nose is always in a book, always. She can see me reading all the time. The log is irrelevant. What the point of the log is to make sure we read, and I am reading. And that was a really great accommodation for me. But also she challenged me where I would otherwise be bored. I was told to do 5 book reports instead of 1 because she thought 1 would be too easy. And she did ask, she said, do you want to do 5 book reports instead of 1? That was just really nice. And over the years, I've started to learn more about accommodations, what I can ask for, what I can't, the paperwork, the mountains of paperwork you sometimes have to do, sometimes every single semester, because accommodations expire, even though disabilities usually don't. Not sure why that is. So at work today, I don't really have much in the way of accommodations. Nothing like written on file at least, but I have my headphones on me. I have earplugs if I need them. And when we go out to like after work events, maybe to a bar or something, no one minds that I might put my earplugs in, or that I will probably order a lemonade or a fruit punch instead of anything alcoholic, because goodness knows my brain's all over the place enough as it is. I should not drink alcohol.
I love that. And I think it is worth mentioning that, folks who are of a marginalized gender often are undiagnosed for longer because most of the diagnostic criteria was built around young boys. And so if your phenotype differs, often you do you fly under the radar. And that's one of the impetuses for founding our AutistX group, because that's for marginalized genders at Google. We have an AutistX group as well. So I appreciated your bringing that up. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts about their journey and when they were diagnosed, et cetera?
I'm happy to kind of bookend the early diagnosis to a much later diagnosis for diagnosed neurodiverse in my mid-30s. And after the, I guess, reclassification in 2015, became more aware of kind of the full spectrum, crossing, ASD and ADHD that I fall within. And I look at it as I got the big box of Crayolas with a sharpener. And so and it's great to have all those colors. And to me, I also, really like, again, that rebranding disability that we all started out with there. I think to me, it's been less about the accommodation and really more about the support. At PwC, it's the first place I've ever said, like, raised my hand and said, like, I have a disability. And I'll say, like, just the act of being comfortable enough to do that was incredibly just powerful, impactful, of being my authentic self. So, like, the impact that it's had, I would say, being diagnosed later in life, is being able to look back and see clearly where it had impact and understanding. And I'd say, from a personal standpoint, that patience, and I have an incredible wife that gives me the structure that I need to succeed at home and at work, which is critical, for sure.
I love that. I think that's also a really good point about the company culture being so critical. I remember that when I walked into PwC in New York, how welcoming they were and how open, and just the fact that they had partnered with Lyme really spoke volumes. So I think that if there's any corporations on the line considering whether they want to partner, I think it's a step you can take that can really make employees feel comfortable enough to be themselves. Thank you for sharing that. Hugo, do you have any thoughts on this subject?
Sure. Well, I see some questions too, so maybe I can help by answering the question with my own story. So I started as an independent consultant when I was 16, and I was never diagnosed as Asperger's or ASD. I was just kind of weird kid with some quirks and some very passionate about certain things. And I have 3 children, and my middle child was kind of having difficulties. And so we took him to CAMH in Toronto, where we made an appointment. And then during the process of evaluating him, we had to fill this form. As we're filling the form, I'm like, this is me. This is me. This is me. So as I went through, I think I scored higher than my own child did, and that's how it was. Like it was 2 diagnoses for the price of 1. Since then, my 3rd child has also been diagnosed with autism, and autism. I've never really made accommodations or asked for accommodations or support. Because again, I started as a kid, right? And I used to go into companies at 16 teaching people who were 40, 50 how to do their job. And, often the people would be like, who are you to tell me how to do my job? Like, I'm going to beat you up in the parking lot, right? So I had to learn to really be kind of stand on my own and take advantage of my quirkiness, turn it into my superpower.
Mhm.
And so how it impacted my life, it's actually been amazing because I got to travel all over the world to just do consulting. And it might, for those of you who are familiar with, autism, it might seem counterintuitive to always look for the unknown and the chaos. But to me, that unknown and that chaos was actually the only known there was. I knew that I could apply my own processes and frameworks to actually solve problems, to get to know customers and to get to understand their requirements. And I've been blessed to have a amazing wife who understands my quirkiness. And, she knows, for example, when I'm in code mode, that if I'm answering with just yes or no questions, I'm not angry at her. I'm just, trying to think like a computer would think more than like a human would think. And that's it
Mhm.
for me.
I love that. I've definitely seen that migration from the autistic parents over into the autistic groups more than once in my experience at Google. Bringing my kid in to look at these diagnostic criterias and realizing, oh, I recognize some of these elements. So thank you for sharing that experience. It's very relevant for sure. So Wade and Hugo, and Wade touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious how your colleagues and employers responded when you disclosed that you were autistic, and what you found to be most helpful, what could have been more helpful. Yeah.
I'd love to share this story real quick. And this was, I would say, probably about a year and a half ago. And I remember the moment on a Scrum call with the team where I kind of I would say kind of opened that door of like, hey, just let everyone know I'm neurodiverse, and I was expecting the no way, and it was met with yeah, Wade, we all know, and I was just so disappointed. I was like, really? I thought I'd been hiding this so well. And I think even if they said, oh really, I would then be upset or disappointed of like, gosh. So I think to me that that even with me masking it or hiding it or trying to be similar, it's clear that I was never able to be, the same, and that's a very good thing, to be your authentic self. I think to me, that the moment of even being part of this panel really gave me the courage to be very vocal about it, and to really get some understanding around it, because I truly believe that there's not a lot. I think everyone has their vision of what autism is, and yet we admire so many of the leaders that have it, and we're afraid or unknown to the ones that do, that are beside us all.
And I love to see the support from your teammates on the chat. We love you, Wade. That's awesome. Very cool.
It's interesting what Wade said, because I think the number one response I got from people was, well, you don't look autistic. And I'd be like, what does autistic look like, right? Well, you look at us in the eyes when you talk, and you show emotion and things like that. And I was actually very taken aback. A lot of these skills maybe were masking, but I developed them to be, an independent consultant, and to be able to, read from social cues from people, to be able to, to handle the situations better. That's why I can't speak on the phone, for example, because if someone's talking to me on the phone, I will completely misread the cues, right? They'll say like, oh, I had to bury my pet over the weekend. I'll be like, aha, that's funny. Like, I just don't understand the context, right? But really, when it was the most impactful for me to disclose that I was autistic at work was one of my colleagues. She's married to a friend of mine, and her son got diagnosed with autism, and it was severe autism, and she was devastated. And she thought that that's it. He's never going to leave our basement. He's never going to, succeed in life. We're always going to need to, babysit him. And her husband is like, well, what are you talking about? You work with someone who's autistic. And she's like, who's that? And so he said, well, Hugo's autistic. And, he's quite successful. And she had no clue. And that's actually when I encouraged her in her journey to disclose, what she was going through as a parent of an autistic child, to help other parents. She told me, hey, you know what? You should put what's the expression? Your money where your mouth is. You should also tell people about your autism and about your journey. And that's really when I started kind of being more transparent about it.
I love that. And that's, you bring up a really good point of that sort of stereotypical cinematic moment where the autism diagnosis is revealed, and then there's the moment of grief. And
yes.
I think we're just programmed to think like that. And certainly it's interesting because that child or that adult is exactly the same prior to the diagnosis as they are after. And certainly it's nice, and I appreciate everyone being here and modeling what autism can look like. It's obviously a spectrum, and there's definitely, I want to rebrand autism a bit similarly to how we're doing for all disabilities, and I think you're going a long way to do that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Hugo, for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So for Sam and Hugo, what accommodations or support factors have been most useful in addressing your needs at work, if any?
I did actually request sort of accommodations once because there's an SEP book club, SEP software engineering program that I'm in. There was a book club, and at first I thought it was not required, so I didn't attend. And then they emailed my manager and were like, can you ask her why she didn't attend? So then I email back and apologize and say, sorry, I didn't realize it was mandatory. I will attend from now on, but here are my disabilities and here are where I think my difficulties will be, which is why I didn't initially attend. I'm autistic, so sometimes the back and forth of a conversation with a lot of people can be difficult for me. I'm ADHD, so it's hard for me to listen. I have 2 different types of anxiety, so sometimes I'll be too anxious to talk. And those are like, talking and listening are the 2 main things in book club. So I'm going to do my best, but I want you to understand, like, if I'm having trouble, like, here's why. It's not a lack of effort. I am trying. I am absolutely trying. And surprisingly, the person emailed me back and said, well, here's a list of things we could do. Would any of these things help? And also told me the book club was not mandatory, but they strongly encouraged me to attend, which I think is code for, we're not making it mandatory, but we will be upset if you don't attend. So I attended, and they told me that they could have me with the same group each time, so I could at least get used to one group of people instead of having new ones every time. They said I could turn the camera off whenever I needed to, step away if I need to, even sign off early if I need to, that they just want me to be there and do my best, and that's really good. That's exactly what I needed. And even better was that they asked, will these things help you? Which of these will be most helpful? They didn't just say, here's your options, take it or leave it. Pick only one, or we're doing this and you get no say in it. They didn't even make me do paperwork, which is wonderful. I love a lack of paperwork. That's how accommodations should be, I think.
I agree. And someone had a question, do accommodations expire? Sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Depending on the rules. When I was in college, I had an accommodation to not eat in the dining hall, which expired, I think it was every semester. So I had to fill out a form every semester saying, I am still autistic. My autism did not expire. I didn't say, oh man, this one's gone bad. I better pick up a new one at Walmart next time.
Yes, thank you. Hugo.
So I always worked as an independent consultant because I got, bored really quickly and needed a challenge, and never really asked for support until I joined Microsoft. And it was one of those things where, again, I didn't really ask, but the first time my manager told me, hey, there's this paperwork that you need to do regularly. You know, you need to do it, and it needs to be done by this time. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. And this is about, basically, it's called the Connect. It's where you report all the things you've done, you know, in the quarter, so that we can show it to leadership and say, yay, Hugo's doing a great job. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm not good at doing any kind of paperwork. I'm not good at talking about all the work that I did, because it's like asking me to describe how I'm breathing or walking. I just do what I do because I think this is an opportunity to do it. And so what I told my manager is I said, hey, you know, I looked at the job description that I applied for. There was never anywhere that said I needed to do this kind of paperwork. And to be honest, had I known that I would have had to do this, I probably wouldn't have applied. And if you're telling me that my ability to be successful at Microsoft is directly depending on my ability to fill, you know, this Connect thing, then I'm wondering whether I made the right choice joining Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And to my manager's credit, she was like, hold on, don't do anything, like don't quit on me. We can work this out. And so we came up with an alternative approach for me to do my connects with her, where we kind of build a little ongoing one-on-one channel in Teams. And it's kind of like an ongoing blog. So anytime that she gets kudos from customers or from peers, or I do something cool and I think about it in the moment, we'll post it on that channel. And then when it's time to do the Connect every quarter, we actually take a copy of that and we post it in the Connect. So it makes it a lot less painful for me. And honestly, that would have been the thing that I would have quit over, because I just, you know, and same thing with, you know, phone calls and you know, video chat. The house could be on fire and my wife could be saying, please call 911. And I'd be like, really, can I just text them, right? Because I really don't want to have to call them. So going on Teams chat, Teams meeting with my team, and nobody having the camera on was really difficult. So I learned to ask for people, hey, do you mind turning on your camera? I really have a hard time kind of reading social cues. And everyone is always happy to do it. They'll say, oh, I didn't do my makeup or whatever, but like, you know what? It doesn't matter to me. I do need your help to be able to see your face and how you react. But that's pretty much it. That's the kind of accommodations that I've been, and I've been very lucky to have an insanely supportive manager at Microsoft.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. And there definitely is a lot of that tedium sometimes associated with things, and whether it's the work processes or just the accommodations process. And it's nice to hear folks sort of questioning it and saying, is it optional? Is it mandatory? What can I do to flex around, you know, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. So Wade and Hugo, receiving feedback is critical to being successful in one's role, but that can be a little different for autistic individuals. Would you be able to share examples of how you receive and interpret feedback and how it impacts your performance?
Yeah, Hugo, your kind of that black and white moment with like your beliefs in paperwork, I certainly can relate to, and even the, like, you know, misjudging feedback or emotions or even facial expressions. I think to me that context and really not only, you know, discussing it, but also writing it down, because what you take away may also be very different than what was said. And just that clarity is so important. And I think to me also with that kind of, I have what's called RSD, which is rejection sensitivity disorder. And that gets into that kind of like your notion of like, if I'm going to do paperwork, I'm out. You know, that easy, just like pull the parachute, and the fear of that. And I think being in a place that you can feel psychologically safe is really important. I think sometimes with people within the spectrum being so much more productive. I think it's between like 90 to 140% more productive. I think there are expectations that are just kind of like, okay, well, they work fast. They can do a lot, so we're just going to put more on them. And a lot of people lack that ability to say no, to disappoint. And that is something to me that just the clarity of feedback and maybe not over asking, because they can work so, apply their magic to it so well that maybe they need to save some.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So I had to talk to my manager and my team members, and I had to say, please don't ever be subtle about feedback. Don't give me hints that, hoping that I'm going to pick up on that hint and change my behavior. You need to be brutally honest. And while it might be counterintuitive for you to be brutally honest with me, that's the only way you're going to get a change in behavior. And one of the things that I've also done to try to force feedback basically into everything I do. Every time I do a presentation, I'll ask my colleagues, and this is a deal I have with my colleagues. We have to, it's mandatory, we have to give each other 2 goods, 1 bad. That way, there's always an opportunity to improve, but it's always sandwiched between 2 good feedback. And it makes it easy because I understand, okay, that's a good feedback, that's a bad feedback. And sometimes we have to kind of nitpick on minor feedback, like, okay, you were talking and I noticed you were swaying back and forth when you were talking. Don't do that. It's distracting for the audience, or whatever the things are. So putting a process in place and asking people to be transparent and brutally honest, in my case, is what works. Might not work for everybody, but that's what works for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I like that. And I think it's interesting because getting that feedback, it's sort of like you learn the rules so you can break them also. So if you're aware that swaying can be disruptive, but it's like something that one does to like stim or to feel calmer, you can start to do that in an educated manner. And you could even explain to the audience, I have autism, and so this is how I present, and, play with me. I really like that. So I'm going to ask a question of Sam and Hugo now. Along with receiving feedback, the way that autistic individuals can communicate can also be different than those who are neurotypical, and sometimes it leaves room for misunderstanding. Can you share an example of when that might have happened to you and how you navigated it?
I've got a good one. I used to kind of hang out after school with my mom while she was doing some of her work as a medical coder. So she'd be at her desk and she'd get, real stressed and frustrated. And sometimes she'd be like sighing or groaning or something. And I would mimic the noises back. And by doing that, what I was trying to say is, I heard that you did that, recognize that you are stressed, and I am also stressed on your behalf. I am kind of agreeing with you by making the same noise that you are. But she turned to me and she said, you're not trying to make fun of me, are you? Because I know you wouldn't do that. So what are you doing? And I had to explain to her, this is what I was trying to do. I did not realize that other people would recognize that as making fun of them. So now I know to be careful if I do that around neurotypical people. And it was a huge help that she asked me outright, I know you wouldn't be making fun of me, so what do you mean? Sometimes you don't get that. So once I was driving with my sister, she was the one driving. I was in the passenger seat. We got to an intersection and I had a friend who would sometimes drive me places, and she asked me to move my head back when we got to the intersection so that she could see past me to check if cars were coming. So we get to the intersection. I throw my head back out of habit. She thinks I'm mad at her because apparently neurotypical people will be just like, ugh. And that means they're angry. So my sister was like, what? And I'm like, what? She's like, what are you mad about? I said, I'm not mad about anything. I explained that's why I threw my head back. she said, don't do that. That's rude. I'm like, okay, what speed am I allowed to move my head backwards at before it becomes rude? She's like, I don't know, just don't do that. So sometimes the rules are not clear. So now I just try to move my head backwards slowly if I'm not upset, just to make it clear I'm not angry at anyone. I just want my head to be back farther. This is not communication. This is movement.
I love that. I agree with Leanne. Sam, you have great stories.
So from my perspective, and I'm going to put things in perspective here, because I want you to understand, we value, or I, as an autistic person, I value directness, and I don't really do well with kind of just beating around the bush. And I expect everybody else to see the world from that perspective. And sometimes that gets me in trouble. Now, I've found a way to actually put controls in place so that it becomes a good thing. But just to give you a parallel, right? When my wife sneezes, I don't say, yeah, bless you, because I don't actually think that her soul is escaping her body, or, you know, her heart stopped. But that's the social, you know, convention to say bless you. And she doesn't like that. She knows, right? But I'll give you another example. And keep in mind, yeah, I do love my wife. She's probably the one person that would actually pick up the phone if she called me, maybe. And so one time we were having dinner, and she started choking on a piece of food. So immediately I started paying attention. Just be aware, because I know the signs. I know that, you know, people who choke will tend to retire, and that's usually when they get in trouble. So I'm paying attention and everything, and then she chokes and chokes, and eventually she catches her breath. So as soon as she catches her breath, I keep on eating. And eventually, when she was able to, you know, catch her breath enough to ask me, she's like, "You're not even going to ask me how I'm doing?" And I'm like, "Well, the fact that you're able to say this right now tells me you're okay." Right? And I'm not being a jerk. I mean, I know as I'm describing it, I realize how it sounds like being a jerk, but I'm not being a jerk. I'm being logical about this. You can talk, therefore you can breathe, therefore you must be okay, right? And so that kind of binary approach, when I talk to customers, I actually had to put that as kind of a disclaimer with customers. Now, the majority of my customers, when I was an independent consultant, they had tried to implement a piece of software 2 or 3 times before I got there. So when I would first talk to the customers, I would say, okay, you hired me to get this done. I will get it done, whether you get in my way or not. So I need your commitment right now. Are you committed to being successful? Because if you're not, like, this is not going to work out. And they'd say, well, of course. They'd say, oh, yeah, of course we want to be successful. And I'm like, okay, well, remember this, because I'm going to hold you to that. And sometimes I might tell you things that you don't want to hear, right? And so I kind of look forward to that first time where I would say, okay, we're going to do this, and say, oh, that's not how we do things here. It's like, yes, and it's also why you've never successfully delivered this project, right? So how about we do things a little differently? So I kind of, you know, my wife says I can get away with saying anything to anybody, and they won't get mad. And that's certainly part of my brand, I guess. But it's tough. Like, sometimes I'll say stuff that people will get offended. I really don't mean to be offensive. I value directness. Yeah.
I think through that lens too, then it becomes incredibly valuable, because, you know, this individual will tell the truth. And I think we get accustomed to hearing perhaps like placations and niceties, and they're not always genuine. So I don't know, a compliment from you would mean volumes. You know,
well,
yeah.
And I think another thing is that people have a tendency to think that autistic people don't empathize, right? And that couldn't be furthest from the truth. I mean, I'll watch the silliest movie and I'll be crying like a baby.
Yeah.
I empathize, right? I'm not being crude or cold. I'm trying to treat you the way I would want to be treated. And I do understand that that's not always the best, but please take that as the compliment that it is intended to be.
I love that. That's awesome. And so I have one more question, or well, perhaps two, depending on how much time we have. But for Sam and Wade, if someone joining today has a coworker or a loved one that they know or believe is autistic, what are the best strategies or techniques for supporting them?
The best answer for that, I think, is ask them in particular what they need. Also, if you just think they're autistic, do not ask them if they're autistic. If they aren't, they might be angry about it. If they are, that's still none of your business, actually. If they want you to know, they'll probably tell you. But even if they're not autistic, you can still help people who aren't autistic. So if the goal is just help someone you know, ask them, are you having trouble with this? How can I help? Because that's going to be down to the individual more. There's no general help thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think and that empathy you talked about earlier, Hugo, and that support, Sam, like to me that I'd say I mentioned kind of that before about like we really admire those that are on the spectrum for their achievements and them being quote unquote visionaries in it. And I think it's if there's someone at work or at home or at school that you think has these characteristics, I mean, to me, I think what we all do so well is kind of shine light in areas where others can see. And I think to me about really kind of being beside them and see what they see, so that will they be ones that change the world? Certainly, they will change the world around them for the people that they're alongside, but really just being there and learning from one another, and that support about letting them be themselves is just so incredible. Because once you do understand that you don't see everything a specific way, it's enlightening. It really is.
That's awesome. And I wonder, Sam and Wade, if you have any tips for finding a company that will be supportive of you as an autistic person.
If you want to check during the interview if they're like an open-minded company, my go-to question for that has always been, what is your balloon animal policy? Because the way they answer that is going to tell you a lot about the company. If they say, balloon animals? Why are you asking that? What kind of a question is that? That's probably not the best company. If, like my Chase interviewer said, they say something along the lines of, you bring your whole self to work here. If that means balloon animals, you bring your balloon animals. That is a good place to work, probably. And that's why I work at Chase now.
Yeah,
I love it.
I certainly just digging into research. Everyone knows I love just digging and researching something. To me, I mean, be it Fishbowl, be it LinkedIn, or be it whatever. But I think to me, just asking questions, and if you feel comfortable enough to ask questions, that's a really good sign. Lena, actually, that joined this call, and thank you for the rock star, Lena. But she was during my first interview at UFC. I pulled her aside. She was in the office, and I was introduced to her, and I said, "Hey, Lena, is this bullshit? Or is this like, I'm smelling a little bit, but like, how much is there?" And she's like, no, it's a really good place. And we all laugh about that, but connecting with someone there, walking the halls, if you're able to, and asking that can go a long ways. Got me here.
Love that. And I would say the balloon animal question is definitely applicable across the board if you want to know if that's a fun place to work, regardless of disability. So it's a great idea. So Hugo, I'm curious what advice you would have for those who are joining this webinar who are living with autism, and about how to talk about their experiences and ask for what they need to thrive in the workplace.
Well, okay, so I used to be that guy that would mask, right? I would try to answer the interview questions, the way I thought they would want me to answer them, and I would try to behave the way I thought a a neurotypical person would behave. And I quickly learned that that's kind of like Superman staying Clark Kent for the rest of his life, right? It's you have things that make you unique. It's a superpower, right? And that's what makes you see the world from a different perspective and makes you come up with ideas that other people might not come up with. And not because, again, you're better than them. It's just you're looking at it from a completely different perspective. So I've learned to, like I've also asked questions like my balloon animal and things like that in my interviews, and I've learned to become like to really show my true self, because I'd rather fail during the interview process than having people like hire me for who they think I am, and then when I start revealing my true self, they're like, no, not good. Right? So I've had an interviewing say, hey, what's your biggest weakness? I said, well, I tend to be brutally honest sometimes. And he said, well, that's not a weakness. I'm like, well, I don't care what you think, was my answer. And again, I played it up a little bit, but because I was trying to sabotage myself, but how they handled that response really told me a lot about how it would be to work for that company. Mm-hmm. One last thing I would want to say is at work, right, there's a lot of amazing organizations that will make provision for people with autism or just people with accessibility needs. But all those organizations all require one thing. It requires you to first disclose that you have needs. And that's the first step, is to be okay with understanding that there are some things that you're not as good at and there's some things that you're better at. And it's okay for you to disclose that you need help. I'm certainly learning that at Microsoft for the first time in my life. And if I can save someone else the trouble from having to go through most of their life without doing that, please go ahead. Tell people. You'll be amazed how understanding people are and how supportive people are. And it really allows you to be yourself. Mm-hmm. That's it for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So I think it's, what I'm hearing is that it's very useful to find what works for us, to be open about, asking for accommodations. But on the flip side, there was a question about neurotypical supporting individuals with disabilities. I personally think that, for example, Ultranauts is working on this model of more universal inclusion. And one of their ideas is biodex, and we have this concept of Google, which is the user manual. So individuals can share what they are individually, what makes them work best. And that goes to the idea of sort of neurodiversity being a broad spectrum. And someone had mentioned that earlier too. So I just want to say thank you to each of you for your perspective, your expertise, your candor, your courage in sharing today. It can be awkward to share one's diagnosis or one's experience sometimes because there is still that small amount of stigma, but it goes a great way towards breaking those barriers down. And I think if you see it, you can be it to an extent. And I don't like to think of disability as a secret. I feel like that it's an important thing to be open about. It's something we all experience. It's the only disability category that pretty much everyone, if they live long enough, will experience at some point in their lifetime. So I think it's a universal thing, and I think we're all going to get there someday if we're not already there. I want to open it up for questions. And Renee, I believe we have a Q&A, if you would like to guide us through that.
Do we have a Q&A? Have you been seeing the chat? And the Q&A is it's blowing up. So thank you all. Your stories are definitely resonating with our audience, and that is amazing. There's no way we have time to get to everything that's out there. So luckily people along the way have been sharing different resources and responding to each other. So that's amazing. So I'm probably only going to pick maybe 2 questions to get to. And hopefully we'll continue this dialogue at another time. One question is, do any of the panelists have stories of getting past social anxieties? One reason I think I may have autism in addition to ADHD is that I've run into barriers in my career around public speaking, formal writing and decision making. I freeze in situations others wouldn't. Would love to hear any thoughts on how to address these. So I don't know if any of you want to speak to that.
I can speak to the public speaking piece of it. I think that it goes back to, so I was within my past agency and business I had, I was often presenting to a lot of high decision makers, and someone throughout my journey told me that you're there because they can't do this, and they really want to hear from you, and you have a skill or a vision that they don't, and that that understanding of that you are special and different. I didn't understand how different back then. It was critical, and as far as public speaking goes, I rip off the Band-Aid. I did an event, 2,000 people. I found out, I didn't know it was that big, and pick a few people out and speak to them. Don't look past that front row.
I, in fact, find it easier to present to an audience than to individual people. It is a lot more anonymous in a sense. I don't know how else to frame this, but I'm an opera singer too. So I don't know, I don't have to make eye contact and I can just sort of share. And I often remember that the folks in the audience, like one thing I do to kind of break the tension is I talk about my interests, or try to, that's how I begin almost every conversation. So I make sure I understand that we have common interests in mind. Although if someone's coming to hear me speak, the chances are we have something in common already. But common interest, I remember when we were having our pre-panel for this, I think the topic of birds came up, and I think we're all best friends now. So, that to me is a very easy way of breaking tension and relieving anxiety. So maybe within a working group, having, interest-based, maybe a games day or something on the side, so that I feel a little more comfortable with the individuals I'm working with, or even presenting to. I'll even Google those individuals and try to get a sense of who they are and what they're interested in, so that I feel more connected and it's easier to chat with them.
Icebreakers are a good idea. Part of the reason I used to carry balloon animals around was because if I wasn't really sure how to interact with someone, I could offer them a balloon animal, and there doesn't seem to be a way for someone to take that poorly. Neurotypical people like balloon animals as much as an autistic person, as far as I can tell. They're also a good way to get children to stop screaming.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Thanks, Sam. I'm kind of combining a couple different questions on the topic of career development and interviewing. Someone mentioned that their son has difficulty, even though he's very bright, interviewing, especially over Zoom, and that can be really challenging. Another person mentioned that a tone can get lost in writing emails, that doesn't come out. How do any of you navigate that, or have any advice for managing those pockets of your career?
If I'm worried about tone in email, I usually just ask a neurotypical person to read it over for me, like, hey, does this mean what I think it means, before I send it? Just like, read this over, let me know. And for interviews, if I want to pretend to be neurotypical, if I think that'll help me get through it, I do like sit up straight, eye contact, firm handshake. I learned that from a cartoon about a bear.
As silly as it sounds, I have googly eyes that I've used to put up beside my camera, and looking at your camera with googly eyes is pretty hilarious, but it gets you to smile, and so that to me is an easy hack to kind of lighten the mood and to look at your camera.
I love that. And also, I know Martin had asked a question a while back about social groups and socializing for people with autism. And, I think that there are a number of organizations that target folks in our kind of profile, but I think also Alyssa sort of answered that, and we're going to start a Line Connect AutistX group, which I think would be great. And for those marginalized genders out there, or folks who identify as female as well, Felicity House in New York is a really great social network for folks in that region that I know of.
Awesome. Thank you, Paulette. We have like 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to share your final thoughts or anything that you didn't get to share that you might want to share with our audience before we close out. Hugo, I'll start with you.
I think I've done this a long time, masking and trying to be someone who is not. I'm not. I can't reiterate that enough. Like, learn to be yourself. But the other thing that I would like you to remember is that everything we've talked about today depends on people saying they are neurodiverse. If your colleagues are behaving differently, or they're being erratic or irrational about things, maybe it's because they either have chosen not to disclose that they're neurodiverse, or maybe they don't even know that they're that word. ADHD, right? Autism, any of these will affect how people work. And this is not they're not lazy, they're not stupid, they're not mad at you. They just think differently.
Thank you. Wade?
Just with the diversity programs at PwC and how important that is, especially in a product world. There's stats out there that 30 to 40% of the world population is neurodiverse in some way. Designing for everyone and working alongside everyone is something that you want to do. So those differences, be it race, religion, gender, neurodiversity, diversity in the brain, matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Wade. Sam?
I think if there's one thing I want you to know from this panel, it's that absolutely seek out autistic voices if you have questions about autism. Do not go and ask an organization that's run by neurotypical people. Do not ask random neurotypical people on the street. Ask an autistic person, and then if you have doubts, ask more autistic people, because we are all very different from each other.
Mm-hmm. And thank you to all of our panelists. And Paulette, I'll give you the final word before I close us out.
Sure. For me, I think it's follow my interests and trust my instincts. My interests have taken me farther than I could have imagined, just being curious. And then if something doesn't feel right, often it's not. And so I just try to find places and people that are safe.
Amazing. Hopefully you're all feeling the love from the chat, if you're seeing how appreciative everybody is for all that you shared today. And we thank you so much. Lyme Connect thanks you for joining us. And I think this dialogue could go on for many more hours, but we all have to get on with our day. So thank you to each of you, and thank you to our audience for joining. And we look forward to continuing this important conversation in the future. Thanks so much, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Renee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
Take care. Bye.